Welcome back, everybody. I'm Sean LaFlock. I'm here with Scotty Hagness. This is Conversations, Fitness, Wellness, and Longevity. Scotty, how goes it?
Going pretty good. Going pretty good.
Very
Just
nice.
wrapped up my last programs for the week. Just filed and put it away right when you called.
You
So
got ahead of the game, aren't you, huh?
ahead of the game. Yeah, just got some training and good to go.
A little training in as well. Look at you. The last, I think I did 4 days of this. I was meaning to do this for a while now, just because I've measured cortisol in the past. I've measured, I've done all sorts of blood work, but I've read this in multiple places. But testing blood sugar throughout the day to kind of get an indication of what obviously we'll talk about some of the things that might indicate as markers for health. So I did a 4-day, 4-time-a-day measure of blood sugar. So it's as simple as taking a blood, a glucose testing kit, your blood sugar testing kit. So one of these, you can get one of them at Walmart, or I order mine off Amazon. You have like a little prick stick. You test the strips, and then it gives you like a digital readout of exactly what your blood sugar is. It's a little bit of blood, nothing big deal. And I took that 4 times a day for 4 days, and just pulling up my numbers here in the morning, which would presumably be, I did 4 times throughout the day. I did it when I woke up, right before I ate lunch, before I ate dinner, and then as I went to bed. So morning was usually, so I have 88, 83, 99, and 98. On the 99 and 98 days, I know that I had some restless sleep. So I woke up, in the middle of the night. One of these nights, I think it was the Wednesday, I think that was the 20th, where I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and then couldn't go back to sleep. And my blood sugar was 99 when I actually tested it. I will say I ate 2 grapes though. Right, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and then was up at about 5:30. Lunch 188, 82, and I think that one was also in the 80s as well. Before evening meal 93, 94, 82, 72, and then before I went to bed 120, 99, 108, and 112. So you've done this before, right, Scotty?
Yeah, I haven't done that exact protocol.
Yep. But you've done blood
But I've
sugar
tested
testing before.
fasting and tested pre and post meals and variety.
So what kind of information does this give you about what does testing your blood sugar kind of give you the information about?
Well, it can really be a lot of things. I mean, the common perception, of course, is, well, how did my body react to the last meal?
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at, how much did whatever I ate spike my blood sugar potentially. But in
Mm-hmm.
this test, you're really looking at more. I really look at it more as a marker of stress.
Yep.
Because you're dumping either cortisol or epinephrine, things that to raise your blood sugar level to prepare for the stressor you're under. Those mornings you couldn't sleep, totally not surprised to see the blood sugar higher
Mm-hmm.
due to that fact. And you hadn't eaten anything. And I think the day you had the 2 grapes was rather negligent. If anything,
Yeah, exactly.
Your blood sugar was actually a tad lower because you did do that.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I mean, some of them, so like a PM1, obviously there's so many things factor into what will regulate your blood sugar. It's not just stress. It's not just what you ate. It's multi-factor. So some of the evening ones might reflect that more, but then training as well. Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. Definitely. Like I would train. Like, so for instance, this was after a workout. My before the lunch one. Before my lunch, my blood sugar was 100. Before my lunch, the blood sugar was 88. Before my lunch, the blood sugar was like another 100. So like the training in itself is a stressor, which would then require you to release blood sugar because cortisol and epinephrine are being pumped out into the blood. Correct?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, you would mobilize that energy for a workout. You're not. Yeah, you wouldn't want to see super low blood sugar going into a session.
Going in or even coming out also. Maybe coming out, but like you obviously
depends on what you do. But yeah, the more deeper fatigue you drove yourself into, you might see that low blood sugar, and that doesn't necessarily mean it was a metabolic beatdown. I mean, you could go do heavy ass singles and see that.
Yeah. The other thing that came to mind also is food stressors as well. I had somebody who had done this, and like they ate a food that was on their food sensitivity chart. on their MRT, and their blood sugar spiked to 200.
Hmm.
And they were like,
There's
"Wait,
a
that can't be right." And they tried it again, and they tested it again, and sure enough, it was in the 200s. So there was a severe reaction that led to a big stress response in the gut, which would then mobilize sugar because you're like in this fight or flight state essentially. So I think that's a really really cool concept of what you were indicating there. It's not about necessarily about searching for foods that are spiking your blood sugar. It's about not only the foods that you're eating that potentially could have high glycemic kind of deal or food sensitivity, or are the activities and stressors within my everyday causing my blood sugar to be at these levels, whether they're completely inverse or depleted or constantly high, whatever they might be.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and you wouldn't want to see the opposite either, where the blood sugars were really running quite low.
Yeah,
Um,
that you're almost
where
completely like dead at that point, pretty much.
totally, yeah, and you're certainly not going to feel that good,
Mm,
not going to mentally function that good, and you're not going to physically function that good in that state either,
yep. So what did you?
nor repair damage.
Yeah. So what did you find when you tested your stuff? Anything interesting?
um, I didn't have anything too unexpected jump out at me. The one thing that I noticed, and I've heard a lot of other people uh, encounter this too, is that at periods of times when I had fasted,
Mm-hmm.
rather than having low blood glucose like you would think, the opposite, it was actually running rather high, was showing that the fasting was presenting itself as a stressor and my body was
Ah.
mobilizing. I would, this is back when I used to do such things as intermittent fasting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was like, man, blood sugar is often, I mean, not every time. Sometimes I would catch it really low, but most of the time it was unusually high. And also when I was back in the days when I was very low carb, also, again, a lot of times through the day, my blood sugar would be surprisingly high. And again, we just know that's the body it's not as simple as what food goes in and was there not carbs that spike the blood sugar, release of cortisol and epinephrine because of no carbs coming in and because of being someone who did glycogen demanding activity, really that
Yeah.
system
Mm.
ramped up.
And obviously, it's a it's a bell curve. Like you just mentioned how much carbohydrates you have. So not enough carbohydrates actually creates a stressor, which would then increase blood sugar
Blood.
levels. Okay,
Yep.
and then obviously, as a result, can you just kind of go over what elevated blood sugar levels would then do to insulin?
Yeah, so then you're basically starting to develop insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Just, we most people understand that's coming from food spiking blood sugar chronically, but absolutely can be stress. And this is one of the ways that stress gets us. So you can be eating this ultra clean diet, whatever that means to you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not eating enough or enough to fuel your activity, or you're under a lot of other stress,
Mm-hmm.
you're you're going to have that chronic blood sugar running high and
So the
secondary insulin resistance because of that.
okay, so
Even
go ahead.
yeah, and so then here's a case where you may store fat
Yeah.
very easily, even though you maybe aren't eating very much, and maybe you're very
Mm.
active, and maybe you're
Mm.
eating very clean, but
Yeah.
you're yeah, so it's totally not as simple.
So I guess the mechanism is the blood sugar spiking or being chronically high. Then, because your body doesn't want free floating sugar in the blood, your insulin goes up to then
Correct. Yes.
store it somewhere. But over time, by chronically having high insulin levels, sorry, this hand, then
Yeah.
your body starts to become resistant to it and has to then pump out more and more insulin to get the same effect, or the cells aren't just going to be storing it. So now you're having this chronic
Right.
hyperglycemia, or
Hmm.
hyper too much sugar in the blood, and obviously there's cascading effects from that. So technically, when people say stress, by just being stressed out you can gain weight, there is a mechanism behind that that doesn't necessarily coincide with eating copious amounts of food.
Correct. Yeah.
Mm.
Exactly.
Yeah, I kind of knew that
Yeah.
inherently, but really didn't like dive into that until I started doing this, because like that makes it much more clear to see that, like, all right, you're eating fairly consistent from day to day, but you have these massive swings in blood sugar, and those are most likely caused by, environmental factors, not just like, things you come in contact with, but like your life stressors as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's really kind of another one of the ways that we can kind of look and see where we're at hormonally under the hood. The other thing that you might see is, have you, if you ever hit a real energy dip, it could be the afternoon for a lot of folks, but we're just like, oh man, if you got one of
Mm-hmm.
those, pull it out and see what's going on, and you
Ah,
might find that a really surprisingly low amount. So that's
yep.
when if our adrenals aren't functioning
Maybe the cortisol is
100%.
at that low,
Yep,
and
everything.
the demand is still high, and you just feel like depleted. So
Yeah.
you're basically you've knocked on the door enough times where it's not answering anymore, and then you
Mhm.
just feel like, oh shit, and then you're like, oh wow, let me pull out some caffeine to open the door back up,
Yeah.
and then you realize like you open that door enough times or you knock on that door enough times that eventually it's going to get more and more resistant to whatever the knocking is,
Hmm.
and then you're smoking PCP. All right, so.
Hmm.
Uh, um, wow, that's fascinating. That really does put things together a little bit more for me in terms of how exercise can be a stressor, how just mindset and mindfulness can be preventers of stressors. Because like if you're not perceiving things as stressful, then you would technically have better glucose levels throughout the day. So even if you were having a not clean diet, if that's something that actually makes you less stressed, and it could potentially decrease your blood sugar levels and insulin levels, then technically you might be able to become more healthy in that sense by not being so strict on diet all the time, or not exercising hard all the time, or getting extra sleep, or taking a week off from whatever that stressor is. So like literally just taking a week off from work and just going on vacation and eating whatever you want, because you are not stressing yourself out. You're not pumping out cortisol. You're not pumping out blood sugar, sugar into the blood. You're not then spiking your insulin. And all of a sudden, by taking a week off from work and going into paradise and eating whatever you want, technically your body could be in a much better state than it was when it left.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It starts to explain why some of these things paradoxical. I mean, I don't even know how many times I've heard people, go on vacation and come back and say, I ate like crap. I thought I was going to gain all this weight. I came back. I'm this much lighter.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm visually leaner. And like, it's time and time again for years. I've heard that, and I've heard other coaches talk about that as well. And um, it's your mindset around it. Exactly.
yeah. And then it kind of like you could take it one step further. It's like, all right, if that is the case, what was this stressor, and how can we minimize the effects of the stressor, given the fact that you probably can't remove that stressor? So say it is your job. All right, cool. So you went on vacation for a week. You feel super, super good afterward. Your insulin sensitivity has returned. You feel better. Your sleep is better. All right, how can you take that and then extrapolate that out further so that you can kind of maximize your health in the long term given those circumstances?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a noble goal to work toward, and
Mm-hmm.
something I think probably all of us have challenges here and there with.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's definitely a scale, because as soon as you put more pressure on one side of the scale, the other side kind of comes up, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, now this is a stressor now because we're putting more emphasis on this, and then it's like, bam,
yeah,
this goes back. So it's like it's all about equilibrium, I suppose, and kind of
yeah,
homeostasis given where you're at currently, because life really never settles down. I don't think.
yeah. No, I think that's a myth that
Yeah,
when we're younger, we think someday that's going to happen, and then
yeah,
at some
and then
point
you're
you
like,
realize,
yeah,
no, that's not really going to
that's
happen.
crazy. Never a good time, right? Never, they're never a perfect time to do anything.
Yeah,
But yeah, very interesting. Very, very interesting. So,
yeah. That inspires me. I mean, I have a glucose meter. I think I haven't measured for a while. I think I just ran out of strips and have been
yep,
lazy to go buy another pack of them.
yep,
Um, that would be an interesting one to see now. Quite a
yeah,
bit later. It would be interesting to correlate it with like some morning HRVs and various things to
yeah, yeah,
that nature
yeah,
and that sort of thing. Get a little insight.
yep, yep. So, I guess wrapping it up, high blood sugar would kind of indicate a high stress response. Lower blood sugar or a moderate blood sugar is more of a moderate stress response,
Yeah.
whereas very low blood sugar, you're looking at something where, unless you're in some kind of ketogenic state, you're looking at almost like depleted adrenals, would you say?
Deplete, yeah, kind of
Or
depleted, kind of
or
longer term
exhausted.
fatigue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I guess fatigued adrenals would be the best way to say that. So, speaking of which, have you ever dabbled in ketogenic stuff before, Scotty?
Oh, yeah, years ago, and on numbers of occasions.
Hmm. And
Did some keto stuff. My first interaction would have been before, geez, I would believe probably the late 90s, before there was like a paleo movement at
yeah.
all. It was something, it was like resurrected from the 70s in kind of the
Hmm.
bodybuilding culture and as a
Yep.
way to get lean. And was seemed super dangerous. You're going to implode your heart potentially. So only do it for 4 to 6 weeks maximum. And I was like, all right, I can do that. And that was kind of my first go at it. And then later, once I discovered intermittent fasting and the early paleo movement in like 2003, 2004,
Yep.
I definitely did phases that certainly were, where I was intentionally trying to stay, sub 50, if not sub 30 grams of carbs per day kind of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I have not, since it's become kind of a newer thing and people are doing the various, bulletproof coffees and all these things, because I'm pretty over those, science experiments on the diet these days.
Yep. Yeah, I know you've tinkered enough. You're like, all right, I know what kind of works now. I know it doesn't work, but I was talking to some people about it because obviously there's always just like this resurgence, like you said, like old becomes new again.
Yep.
And we have more and more ability to kind of control this stuff. There's more supplementation now where we can kind of get into ketogenic states more easily and stay in those states. There's more products out. I was actually listening to a Joe Rogan podcast. There's I think he's I want to say is a biochemist who he had on who specializes in interventional medicine with ketogenic diets. So obviously you have to take everything he says with a grain of salt because obviously they say there's about 20 to 30 diseases that are treatable with ketogenic diets, and we're not talking about intermittent fasting type stuff. We're talking about like full on low carb, living off ketones. And he actually mentioned that it could take up to 6 months for people to get into a ketogenic state.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that I've never was, I would have had,
And to adapt it to it as
yeah.
well.
So the thing I always found, and this goes back kind of coincidentally to what we were talking about earlier, is that one of the things, even in the early phases, I talked about we'll get some keto strips, see if you're in
Yep.
ketosis, and I really never got much of a marked rise in ketones at any phase
Huh.
of doing ketogenic diets, and this was in the early phase, and then the later kind of paleo-y phase of it. And when I did get a blood glucose meter, my blood glucose was always usually rather surprisingly high. So
Mm-hmm.
and maybe there is a deeper adaptation, like what you
Yeah.
just mentioned in the six
Yeah.
months, because I would have certainly had, off the diet days here and there.
Mm.
I don't know how much, if you have to be 100% strict for 6 months or what the
Yeah.
the protocol is, but I always assumed that at least my physiology did not go into ketosis very well. It stayed ramped up with gluconeogenesis processes cranking along, probably due to the way I exercised through
Yeah.
all these phases. Whereas if I had been more or less a couch potato, or I did, breathing, yoga, and walking as my
Yep.
activity, maybe
Yep.
it would have been somewhat different.
I think
Right?
one of the other things is when you do go so low sugar and you're not able to readily produce the ketones yet. So this actually might be an indication of what was going on for you, because they kind of talked about that. Is like if you're not able to produce ketones quick enough, then you will go through gluconeogenesis, and then you're just basically spinning your wheels because you're just going to be continuing to metabolize glucose. So
Right.
they have now supplementation that's basically you're taking in ketones so
Yeah,
that you don't
exogenous
go
ketones.
into gluconeogenesis, and
And it kind of
you don't muscle waste either.
and blunts it a little bit. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I certainly must have gotten,
Yeah.
another theory I had heard, kicked around back then and also potentially made sense because I really did do it for quite a few years.
Yep.
My cheats were super minimal. Um, is that I was using a lot of what was available. I wasn't wasting it in the urine
Mm.
because I definitely did gain. During my super low carb over the course of a little over a year, I gained I think about 15 pounds of muscle at one point
Oh wow.
without any fat whatsoever.
Oh wow.
So there was clearly some mechanisms that happened, and I did it on a second occasion too after I had dieted down for something, and I put and so I clearly was getting into an anabolic state in
Mm.
those phases. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
hard to
so
say whether.
take what you want from that. Obviously, you weren't doing a ton of metabolic training during that time as well, or
No, the time I was still
oh
pretty
wow.
straight up. This would have been 2006 ish,
So you
maybe.
were a true kind of ketogenic, anabolic
CrossFit ish.
CrossFit.
Yeah. I mean, I would have definitely done some lifting and gymnastic strength work on the side and then done WODs
Mm-hmm. So,
and
so
movement work. But
so what happened with that there, Scotty? Did you kind of get to a tipping point where you're just like, this isn't sustainable for me anymore?
well, yeah, the problem is, I think, as I really continued ramping up stuff like in 2009, kind of prepping for, the games that year. And I just after that, I wasn't able to reach levels I had been to
Mm.
a number of years back on a number of things. Something skill based and strength based, I was getting better, and I was just wasn't sure. That's when I had some bunch of testing, and I had high insulin, markers that would suggest insulin resistance, low testosterone, low,
Yeah.
adrenals were south, estrogen was oddly high, basically
Mm.
the full hormonal cooked panel.
Yep.
And that was when I started. I didn't immediately ditch the low carb and the paleo, but it set me looking at a different direction,
Yep.
which I've talked about quite a bit, and how I realized that actually, maybe we do need carbs, and then more and more, and all the way to, maybe I guess 4 or 5 years ago now that I went and really went to the very high sugar Ray Peat style thing as an experiment, and actually
Yeah.
felt pretty damn awesome doing that.
Yeah, I
Oddly
was gonna
enough,
say, like, just based upon what you were talking about before, how you really never produce ketones, maybe genetically you're just not wired to do that as easily.
yeah, I think yeah, I must be, and I haven't had any specific tests, but I must do pretty well with carbs. So I've eaten, my diet now for like 5 years is largely carbohydrate based, and I
Yeah.
still have those Harpenden calipers from when I did biosig, and
Mm-hmm.
I take a check on my abdominal skin folds, and they're still about as low as they ever were when I
Yeah.
was fasting and
Yeah.
ketogenic and eating super clean. And honestly,
Yeah.
I'm for the most part, I don't give a rat. I mean, I eat
Yeah.
protein, I eat carbs, but I don't. I eat all kinds of things that would have made me cringe for a lot of years,
I
and I
know.
haven't gained any body fat from it. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, it's actually interesting thinking about that because like going back to like the MRT is not something where you're going to avoid these foods forever. You just give yourself a break for them and you reintroduce them so your body can actually not sound the alarm. They can have some kind of unless you're allergic to it, you should be kind of digesting it. Will it have
mm-hmm.
some kind of stress response? Like I'm not saying you're eating M&Ms every single day, but if you let something into your diet that isn't necessarily squeaky clean, like you go on vacation, you have this, and you really don't have it, it shouldn't make you sick. It shouldn't have an
Right.
enormous stress response. So, that's kind of like one of the reasons why you don't really want to be too strict and too monochromatic in terms of diet, not only because of that, but because, there's just such a broad spectrum of vitamins, minerals, micronutrients
Yeah. I
that
mean,
you
I see
want to
more
have
and
tons of
more.
variety.
Yeah, like more and more, and you see more functional medical doctors and naturopaths and coming around to the idea that you can pretty much guarantee nutrient deficiencies on anyone who's on any form of restrictive, whether it's paleo, vegan, down they all we're designed to be omnivores, and there's a reason why a lot of times we can't even hit the norms on these tests. Which think about that. I mean, people are eating super clean are deficient compared to the average American that the standards are
I
based
know,
on,
right?
and you see that really often, and so it's I think we need the spectrum, and I look at I think we've probably all heard this analogy, the bucket or the glass,
Mm-hmm.
and stress from anything, right, or training, maybe sleep, food, whatever coming in, if it's not overflowing, you have a larger reservoir, right? If you put in some food stress because
Yeah.
you ate something that was maybe a little bit inflammatory or not completely clean, that's not really going to cause an issue. But if that thing's almost overflowing already, it takes
Yeah.
very little of that substance, and now you've created a more systemic response. So you basically, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And
Yeah.
so,
Which gives you incentives to make sure that all the areas that you can control, you should be, taking hold of it and really choosing to let things go and little stupid things like, all right, going to bed on time. Like, is it a necessary stress for you to stay up for an extra hour? Is it necessary for you to do the extra Metcon? Like, what's the gain out of it versus what you're actually taking out of it? Because when you start thinking of it and just kind of saying that, when you start thinking of it, it's not an unlimited reservoir that you're pulling from.
yeah.
So it's like, all right, there's this much stress from it. There's this much gain from it. If the stress outweighs the gain, don't do it. Like, I know it's hard for us to objectively say what's actually going to be helpful for us, but I think that there's
Mm-hmm.
indicators right when you start to do something or you think it's about to do it. Like, I know for me, like when I'm overtrained, I go, I don't want to work out anymore. I have no desire to train. I'm like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
well, if I'm not peaking for something, I'm not going to train. I'm going to take a day, two, maybe even three off. I want to get back in the gym at the end of that. I'm like, I can't wait to go train and go try stuff and figure stuff out and tweak with things. Like, that's how I know I'm ready to go, because I'm afraid to never train again. Because I'm like, if I stop training now, I'm never going to want to train again if I stop, and I'm going to lose everything I got. But it's like, you're not gaining anything in the first place, my friend. So like, just take 2 or 3 days off and don't like fill that void up with stress. Let that go. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
something else we do. It's like, oh, I have an off day. Time to do 6 hours of work and yard work and do an extra
Right.
class.
That just completely undoes everything. Yeah, the rest days should be rest days in other areas too, or else you're not really getting the benefit of taking the rest,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it all goes in that same bucket. And the
Yep.
nice thing, if you have long-term development and a good aerobic base, you
Mm-hmm.
basically have a larger bucket. You
Yeah.
can, that
That's a good way to
explains the
grow the bucket a
resilience.
little bit.
Yeah, yeah. But with that said, because there's so many type A people in the fitness world, you
Yeah.
can't grow the bucket too quickly, because if you try to grow it too quickly, it overflows. It can only be expanded slowly over time and consistent work.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think that's one of the things that people don't respect is that, like, oh, all right, I did 20 minutes of Z1 work this week. Okay, now I can do 60 minutes, or now I can do higher intensity stuff. I was like, no, dude, like, you need months of this. You need to get to the point where this is no longer stressful for you. Like, when
Mm-hmm.
you've overcome the all right, this is boring, like at that point, then you can go ahead and either lay in more volume or layer in more intensity based upon what you're actually trying to get out of it.
Yeah.
So you got anything else there, Scotty?
No, I think it's a good one today.
Yeah, man, we had a
Yeah.
couple good topics here.
Yeah.
If you do end up tinkering around with that, let me know, and I'd like
I'll
to
definitely let you know. Yeah, we'll
do
definitely
some
talk about
things.
that.
I mean, again, like, in using that tool, and then putting it into a different context and seeing what you know now versus what you knew then, I think would be a really cool thing to kind of tinker with. Let's get some good information out of it.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Definitely. So I will attempt to do that here in the next couple of weeks, hopefully.
Perfect. Cool. All right, Scotty.
All right.
Well, I am Sean LaFlock. You can get me at sean@crossfitdelawrybeach.com.
I'm Scott Hagnes. You can get me at scott@crossfitportland.com.
We did it, Scott. Good work, buddy.
All right.
I'll see you next
Take
week.
care. Good work.
Yeah.